Thank God it's still legal to talk about my Jesus in the public place. The night is coming, people, when no man can work. The way things are going, it may soon be illegal. The night is coming, my friend, when no man can work. I'll work the work of him that sent me while it is day. Rise up, sleeping soldier. Rise and take your place again.
Hello and welcome to Kingdom Culture. My name is Buchi, and let me call this one the sights and sounds of CUBA. I sat in church one day not so long ago, some years ago, and I heard the Spirit of God dictate a poem to me, and I began to write. An envoy in His Majesty's employ. To a dark, distant land I was sent, and there with zest I went. There His work to prosper and reward all who were proper. I looked around the society. I searched through the polity. Who could save the people? None, it seemed, but not so indeed, for crouched in a corner was a man in prayer, who travailed and wept for the pain that others felt. That. To him I gave the seed. And I kept wondering, what could this mean? To him I gave the seed. It took all of 6 years before I was graciously nominated to be in the team, in the Rhapsody Travels team that would visit Cuba. And this was a dark, distant land, as had been prophesied in that poem, as the Spirit of God had revealed to me in that poem. Well, we traveled to Cuba, and we traveled for 21 hours before we arrived Cuba, carrying our luggage of Rhapsody of Realities. Of course, we were promptly detained at the airport for another 5 hours. They were considering whether to put us in prison, lock us up in detention, or let us go. Because of what we had, they said it was prohibited. We were bringing religious material into a country that did not allow it. And so they kept us in detention at the airport for 5 hours, going to the 6th hour. Eventually, the Spirit of God intervened and we were released. And we were released into Cuba, into Havana, with our luggage of hundreds, thousands indeed, of the copies of Rhapsody of Realities. The immigration officials and the customs officials who detained us were the first to receive copies of this devotional. But something happened while we were in Cuba. The government official who was to take us around Cuba, guarantee our protection from the police and law enforcement officials, was nowhere to be found. That government official was nowhere to be found. Contact had been made with him, but suddenly he just went away and left us to do nothing in Cuba. But not so indeed. While we looked around to just take a stroll, armed with our copies of a Rhapsody, of course, we ran into a tour guide, and from one story to another, the tour guide, on seeing us, broke down and began to weep when he found out we came from Nigeria. He said the Spirit of God had woken him up in the morning and said to him, "Call your pastor." He called his pastor, and his pastor confirmed that the Spirit of God had woken him up by 4 in the morning and said, "We will have visitors from faraway country. When they come, receive them, bring them to me, leave your pulpit for them. I sent them to you with a message. It was divine. And so it was that without the help of the government official, we found the man in that poem who was crouched in a corner, travailing in prayer for Cuba. When I sought to find out what he had been praying about, he said he was crying and weeping for Cuba. He was asking God to bring the gospel into Cuba. And there we were. The Acts of Apostles are still being written today, even till today, even till this day. And as many as would join themselves to do the work the Lord has called us to do would be part. Maybe the Paul, you may be the Dorcas, you may be the Apollos of today's Acts of Apostles. You may be the Philip, you may be the Stephen of today's Acts of Apostles. The government official took off and was nowhere to be found. And early in the morning, as we gathered to pray, before setting out to distribute the rhapsody of realities, the Spirit of God spoke to us. One of the things he said to us was that we had brought to Cuba a seed. And I said to myself, the seed again. And that the seed would be planted in Cuba, but that we should not wait to see it grow. We should plant it and leave. And the pastor who led the delegation said this was what the Spirit said to him, but that the seed would be a subterranean seed, that underground the seed would grow, only the roots would grow and spread through the land of Cuba, but it would not sprout for all to see. But underground, the roots of this seed, or the roots from this seed, would get into every household and every council in Cuba. And suddenly, it would begin to sprout. And I said, wow. That was a word that came from God. And then another word came from God. He said, because of this material, because of this seed that you have brought into the nation of Cuba, the laws of this land would change. I am about to rewrite the laws of this land to accommodate the seed that you have brought. Because the seed that you have brought into Cuba is abominable to them, not allowed by their law. But rather than the seed to die, the laws would be rewritten to accommodate the seed. That was the word of God. Everything happened in line with the vision, the poem from the Spirit that he had given to me to write. And so it was that we went to see the pastor who invited us. He gave up his pulpit and we began to share the message from Rhapsody of Realities. At the end of the day, the entire church, nearly the entire church, even his deacons and his assistant pastors, gave their lives to Christ. It was a glorious meeting. And guess what? He was the man crouched in a corner. He was in that poetry. Guess what? He had called and travailed in prayer for us to come, for us to bring the seed. Guess what? A few months after we left Cuba, the laws of the land were rewritten. And suddenly, Cuba opened up and reconciled with America and reconciled with the rest of the world. And there came a free flow of persons and religious material into Cuba. Rhapsody of Realities opened up the nation of Cuba. Not any political negotiation, not any economic offer. Rhapsody of Realities opened up the nation of Cuba. When we stand before Jesus to talk about this, I will hear him say, "Thank you. Well done, thou good and faithful servant." I would hear him give account. I would hear the angels give account of how Rhapsody of Realities opened up, unlocked the door or the gates of the nation of Cuba. And suddenly the land opened after that visit. And now we can preach the gospel in the nation of Cuba. Of course, the subterranean seed is yet spreading to every council, every household. Not too long from now, it will sprout for all to see. And suddenly, that statue, that big statue in the nation of Cuba, will not be a decoration anymore. It will be representative of the faith of the people of Cuba. God bless you.
Thank God it's still legal to talk about my Jesus in the public place. The night is coming, people, when no man can work. The way things are going, it may soon be illegal. The night is coming, my friend, when no man can work. I'll work the work of him that sent me while it is day.